Hey, this is Peter Bell, and I am in the beautiful wine country of Central Coast, California, in Santa Maria, north end of Santa Maria, in Santa Barbara County. I serve Redeemer OPC, Redeemer Orthodox Presbyterian Church, on the north end of Santa Maria. We meet at Temple Bethel, which is right there, Temple Bethel, at 11 a.m. for Sunday service and 9:45 a.m., so just before that, for Sunday school for all ages. We have kids Sunday school, adult Sunday school, or all Sunday school at 9:45. You can find us at discoverredeemer.org with one R. Again, discoverredeemer.org. We have a bunch of activities throughout the week, but most importantly, Sunday we have the gospel preached, the sacraments administered, and church discipline faithfully brought out. So I hope to see you here at Redeemer OPC in Santa Maria, Central Coast, wine country of Santa Barbara. Hope to see you.
Hey everybody, this is Pastor Danny Hyde from the Oceanside United Reformed Church. I want to invite you out to our church. We meet in sunny Southern California, here in San Diego, and we meet at the Army Navy Academy in Carlsbad, right along the ocean, as you can see, the Pacific. And we meet every Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We hear the Word of God, we hear the gospel preached. We have the Lord's Supper every Sunday morning, and then we have Sunday school at about noon for kids. We come again together at 5 o'clock every night, Sunday night, for teaching, prayer, and singing. And then we also have various midweek groups, Bible studies, men's, women's, and also other Bible studies as well throughout the week. So I want to invite you out to worship with us. If you know anybody in the area here in North County of San Diego, invite them as well. Let them know. You can find out more about us on our website, oceansideurc.org, or also on all those various social media. You'll find us as well. God bless.
Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. Today, we're on a season 7 episode, Finding Jesus Throughout the Whole Bible. And it is technically episode 3, but we are on the second episode of talking about the second section, back half of more than a half of Genesis. So we're talking about Genesis 12 through 50. So we are still obviously within the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, written by Moses, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. Just a kind of a quick reminder recap of last episode, which is Genesis 1 through 11. We're more in the primeval era, and now we're in the patriarchal era, 12 through 50. I know Dr. Hyde will confirm this or not, but around the second millennium BC, maybe, is where we're talking about where we're at in Genesis 12 through 50.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And then, so we'll talk more about terms and, I know people have heard the terms Torah and Pentateuch and things like that, the law, instruction, those kind of things. So Danny Hyde is our third co-host for all of season 7, and we're going to be jumping into this. And before I do that, just as a moment of some new references I've been using, and you guys definitely go into it too, Peter and Danny, but I've been reading The Messianic Vision of the Pentateuch by Kevin Chen. It's been helpful, again, covering the first 5 books of the Bible and finding Christ throughout that. And then obviously I've been using my NIV Biblical Theology Study Bible by D.A. Carson. So let you guys give you guys time to speak. I'll further introduce my 2 co-hosts today. Both,
and don't forget too our social media. So our YouTube, our Twitter, our social media profiles. You guys can find us at Guilt Grace Pod. And then we'll talk more stuff. We forgot last episode, but both Danny and I, well, I'm being called to candidate, so not quite a pastor yet, but Danny's a pastor at Oceanside. And we forgot to talk about your Greystone Institute courses. So because I think by the time this comes out, they're like either around the corner or they're starting. So talk a little about what you're doing for Greystone.
Sure. Greystone Theological Institute. You can find it online.
This will come out January 15th. So when's the class coming out?
So I should have a class in the spring. That's the plan. So like April-ish, I believe. And it'll be in person. And again, I believe like 99% it's going to be in Boise, Idaho. A couple churches there are hosting a learning community, and so I'll be there in person. And people can also join online if they'd like. But yeah, class will be on the theology and practice of preaching. So looking forward to that. Greystone offers, lots of online stuff and conferences and events and classes. There's like a class right now. Well, not right now, but not right now when this airs. But like going through like Augustine's Confessions, for example.
Nice.
So you can do that like in 7 weeks. But yeah, we offer, masters and MDivs through Westminster, Philadelphia, and then THM and PhD through Puritan. So, but with Greystone courses and instructors. So it's a partnership. Yeah, and it's meant to be, there's lots of levels to it, but my focus is on helping to train pastors, potential pastors who are, quote unquote, embedded, members of a church somewhere, like in Boise, Idaho, Hillsdale, Michigan, Dallas. There's multiple, like Detroit, someplace on the East Coast. We have a learning community now in Philippines. We're hoping to get going. So students who are, embedded in their local church and want to study locally, and have a pastor who's capable and competent to be able to guide and direct study, whether in person or online and self-directed. So it's not like you're doing online. It's not online seminary. It's you're with a pastor, and you're doing courses in person, whether it's in Philadelphia or in your local community where I come or others come and teach. So, but yeah, in the spring, look for it online somewhere. Greystone Institute in the spring in Boise, Theology and Practice of Preaching.
There you go. We'll have a
That's
link
awesome.
in our show notes for that as well.
I would love to do something like that and be a student of that sometime if I can work it out. For somebody like me who has who's obviously interested in theology, I'm not looking to be a pastor ever, but just want to get some sort of master's in theology, some sort of degree. And I, just based on my where I'll live and life, I'll have another job and things like that. It'd probably be like online for that, to be something fit for somebody like me.
Sounds
right?
like a good amount of flexibility for somebody who's in Nick's shoes.
Yeah, you could get an MAR, Master of Arts Religion, if you wanted to, an actual degree. It would be, via Westminster, Philadelphia, with Greystone imprint. Yeah, and you can do it online. MDiv students, of course, need to, have a local pastor, theologian who's guiding them and directing them and studying along with them. But yeah, for master's degree, and also there's also like a certificate program as well, like a non-academic degree, but you're still doing coursework and you're still doing like lectures and listening to events, that kind of thing too. So
nice. I'll definitely be talking to you more about that offline and throughout time and stuff. Yeah.
You can make the short drive from Coeur d'Alene down to Boise.
Yeah, a little bit short.
A short 8-hour drive.
Yeah.
Do they have roads up there in Coeur d'Alene? I don't even know.
That's right. They just have. They just have potato lined streets that are in Idaho, bring you everywhere else. You notice how Nick didn't respond to that one. He's like, I'm just leaving that one alone.
Exactly.
It's
you
guys are showing how much you don't know about Idaho, but okay.
It's
potatoes in the blue football field, right? And
that's
Boise,
right.
Boise State.
That's all. Yeah, that's all South Idaho stuff.
Yeah,
but, that's
all Southern California, Idaho, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, Northern Idaho is more similar to like Washington State and Montana. Okay. There's no potato really kind of significance up there. It's more of lakes and forests and mountains and
there you go. There's no fun stuff, no potatoes.
No, way more fun. Anyway, the friendly rivalry between those two parts of the state.
So it's kind of like NoCal and SoCal, right?
Kind of. Right. And fun fact about Idaho, I guess there's only a couple, but
only a few people in Idaho, so there could only be a few fun facts.
There's 2 time zones actually. So if you're in South Idaho, it'd be Mountain Time Zone, And
Oh,
if you're in
interesting.
North Idaho, it's Pacific time zone.
Oh,
So if you're in Coeur d'Alene, or any of that up in the Chimney area, as they like to call it, that's Pacific time zone. So it's like
Huh.
Seattle and
Hmm.
California, and then
Yep.
time zone, and then South Idaho is Mountain. So it'd be like Denver's time zone and
Is that
stuff
because
like
North
that.
Idaho just doesn't want anything to do with South Idaho? So like we're just gonna be on two different time zones.
There's a lot of maybe some geological factors. It's a funny shaped state. So anyway,
That's right. We can make fun of Idaho all day long. Well, let's talk
Yep.
about Genesis.
uh,
All right.
yeah. So this is going to be helpful. And before we recorded, you guys helped maybe because this is a big section, chapters 12 through 50, huge.
Yeah.
So
39
maybe,
chapters. Yeah.
to digest it easier, 12 through 25 is roughly like Abraham's story. Then 26 through 36 is Abraham's offspring, primarily Jacob and Esau's story. And then 37 to 50 is more the Joseph narrative.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. First question, picking up where we left off at Genesis 11, to connect that, what period of history is God's dealings with his people in Genesis 12 through 50? More specifically, how does Abraham and the Tower of Babel connect us to Genesis 12, where we left off?
Yeah, Danny, why don't
11.
you start this one off, and then I'll join in your reign.
Yeah, I think we mentioned last time. If we didn't, then we'll do it here. So we're going from Tower of Babel, where everybody's again, this is like
one. Everyone
Yeah.
groups together.
This goes to the whole question of like universal versus local flood, and is this like a universal experience, or is this like one local place that uses universal language? So all these people groups are gathering at this one place, right? This plain in the land of Shinar, and they're making this tower, and they're doing it to make a name for themselves. And towers, a ziggurat would have been like a ziggurat, right? Some kind of tower structure.
Yep.
In those days, this at the very top was a temple. That's where you met with God.
There have been a lot of those in this land, a lot of ziggurats in this land.
Yeah. And so like they're building this temple structure because this tower structure with the temple on top, because that's where you met with the gods, and that's how you can reach the gods. And so
that's where you met with the God, not the God
Yep.
met with you.
That's right. Yeah. So you built it up, right? And then like the priest is up there, and if anyone listening's ever been to like Cancun, Mexico, and you go to like see Mayan, like Mayan temple structures, right? Like Chichen Itza and that kind of thing.
I was about to pronounce that name. I was like, I'm gonna screw that one up.
Yeah, I went there, and you're not able to climb up anymore. So they're like, because people have jumped off and that kind of thing, or they've fallen off, or
oh my gosh.
So you like only limited amount of like of those structures, the smaller ones where they have like guides and they take you up. But yeah, the very top
was my wife and I's or not anniversary. That was our honeymoon was there
at the top of a temple, and you guys sacrificed.
The top was we set a picnic table and tried to meet with God.
Oh gosh. So so they're making a name for themselves, right? Like I think it harkens back to the temptation of the serpent to Adam and Eve, to Eve and Adam, to become like gods, or to have your eyes open, to reach the heavens, to reach God, to make a name for yourself, to be like God. So the Lord, of course, had other plans, and he scatters people, he disperses them, he confuses their languages, and so forth. And so it's out of that like idolatrous context we mentioned last time, Joshua 9, where Joshua mentions to the Israelites that God called Abram from a family of idol worshipers. So we have this whole like universal language of a universal flood, universal scattering, but then now you have this one man. So God is now working, the covenant like idea is now like focusing in on one man and then his one family. And then from that, though, the blessing, of course, is that through you, through Abraham and through his seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Or what the Lord's doing here.
So Babel is or language used for all of earth to be gathered into one place and make a name for themselves. And then that is reversed in both the curse of Babel and in a language also given to Abram, where he is told that he will be from him will come kings of nations, the blessing of the nations will come. So even after the reversal of the curse in Babel, you give in like a further reversal and then into a blessing on Abram for all these blessings will come upon him and his family, and especially his seed will be the one that will find its place through the nations.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah.
That's good. So the overall flow and narrative structure, could you help us answer that of Genesis as a whole, Genesis 12 through 50? What is the important covenantal dealings? How should we read this?
Yeah.
Well,
sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
Danny, you
Peter,
go first. You
Okay,
go
yeah,
first.
I was just gonna say, like, kind of like piggybacking on what we just said. The Lord talks there about, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That's in Genesis chapter 12, and then like later on, chapter 15, you have this language again of offspring or seed is the older language of seed. And then 17 again, with the covenant circumcision, but this language of seed. So again, it goes back to Genesis 3:15, reminds us of what we've already seen, the seed of the woman that's going to crush the seed of the serpent. And then Paul makes obviously, a huge deal out of this.
Yeah, Galatians 3 and 4.
In Galatians 3, yeah, and 4, that even that language is quoted, like, it's not to offsprings, plural, but to your offspring, singular. God is going to make this promise, and through that one singular seed, all the world is going to be blessed. Well, who's that one seed? Well, Paul tells us that one seed is Messiah, is the Lord Jesus. So like all of it connects to what God is doing in his covenant promise to bring that Messiah, to bring that seed, champion figure who's going to crush the serpent. It's all here, but in like a seed, in a seed form, right? In a smaller, like, beginning form.
Yeah. And with Abram too, so I think he's not renamed until, is it Genesis 17? He's renamed into Abraham. So father of nations is Abraham.
That's right.
But even between 17 to 22, we'll call it kind of the covenant makings and the signs and stuff with Abraham.
Yep.
You don't get, like, we think of Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons of Father Abraham, and we kind of think of him as like a kind of just a purely righteous figure in a sense. Like, he did all the right things and he got the sign, he believed it, and all this went well. And through 20, like we'll go straight from 12 to 22 and say, like, oh yeah, of course, like Abraham was believing in God. He gave up his only son, which sounds a lot like the father giving up his son, who agreed to be given up for the redemption of us all. But you get two specific episodes of Abraham replaying Adam and Eve's transgression in the garden, where he gives his wife to Pharaoh. I guess you can say, quote unquote, gives his Eve to the serpent and says, "Hey, why don't you take her? She's not actually my wife. She's just my sister." Because he's afraid if Pharaoh sees his beautiful wife, and you can put there like beautiful fruit, which is what it looked like for both Adam and Eve. He's afraid if Pharaoh saw his beautiful wife, that Abraham will be killed. So he'd rather put up his wife to death than Abraham be put to death.
Yeah,
which is interesting because that doesn't get as much play, I think, sometimes in preaching Abraham.
Yeah, and if Abraham or if Abram, if he's put to death, well, how can the seed promise come to be true, right? So, and so Abraham's reasoning is like, well, I got to do something about this.
Yeah, I got to do something about this. I got to preserve myself.
Yeah, like from our, how we understand the Bible, like this is the sin nature, kind of rearing its ugly head, and this is like Abram's way of like doing something, like contributing, like this is his self-righteousness. These are his works, like he has to do something about it. And the same thing, like you're probably going to mention also, like the Hagar, right? Story.
Yep.
So, and we should mention, like, he lies about his wife twice.
Yeah.
Right?
And both times immediately after receiving the promise of the covenant.
That's right. So yeah, chapter 12. And then
right after God tells him he's going to bless him, the next story is him going and telling Pharaoh that Sarah is his sister.
Yep.
And then same thing with 15 to 16, where he's given the ceremony where Yahweh walks through the broken halves in the fire and takes all the curses of the covenant upon himself if he doesn't fulfill this. And then right after Genesis 15, you have Abraham was like, well, I think I could do it. So he goes and takes the servant woman that Hagar gives him, which again sounds a lot like Adam and Eve.
Yep. Yeah. And I think we mentioned last time, and you just mentioned right here, just to like bring out the significance of Genesis 15, when the Lord reiterates the promise to Abram, and then he tells Abram, to bring these animals, sacrifices, right? And he cuts them in half, like he ritually sacrifices them.
Yep.
And he lays the two pieces, like, it makes kind of like a column.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because normally in the ancient Near East, like when a covenant or a treaty was made.
And this is also in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah describes this covenant ceremony as well.
Yep. Yeah. The two parties, like, Peter and I would like together, like, hey, we're making this covenant together, and we're going to walk through these pieces together. And like, we're both saying to each other, like, hey, if I don't keep my end, and you're like, hey, if I don't keep my end, may I be cut in half, and may I be, slain.
May I
like
be
these
like
animals.
these two sliced halves that I'm walking through.
But then the amazing thing is, like, in this context, it's the Lord's like tells Abram, I think you mentioned this last time, like, you go take a nap. Like, you don't do anything. Like, you're not going to contribute anything to this covenant.
Same phrase and word used when God or Yahweh puts Adam to sleep and then takes Eve out of his bone. Is that same phrase for when he puts Abraham to sleep and then goes and takes the covenant stipulation on himself.
And God's doing all the work, right? Like, God is taking upon himself
cases.
Everything. And I think, and I've pointed this out in the past, like, this is like another way of what we saw with the rainbow, the bow. Where the bow is pointed upwards, and God has taken upon himself like the curse of the covenant. Like, if I'm not faithful to my covenant, then I'm going to be shot through. And the same thing here, the Lord's saying, like, I'm taking all the negatives,
same
all
exact
the curses,
ceremony, just different kind of things happening.
Same thing. And which is amazing. It's like God is doing all the work here, people. Like, all
all
and then
Abraham's
right afterwards,
doing is failing each time to uphold his, quote unquote, his side of the covenant.
So and God has just like shown Abram, like, he sees it in a vision, this smoking fire pot, flaming torch, which come up again later on in Exodus, the smoke and the pillar of smoke and fire. And then right afterwards, Abram's like, hey, God just gave me this covenant. He showed me this. I did this ritual. He did all the work. He passed through. All the curses come on him. He's so faithful to his promise that he's willing to put himself to death, if that's even possible. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to go take this concubine and have sex with her and make the seed come to reality. It's like, dude, didn't you just see what the Lord did? Like,
he's
so impatient. Like,
he's you can say, like, it's not, how do I say this? It's not him disbelieving God so much as he believes in himself. He's like, okay, thanks God for this sign and stuff, but I think I got it. So, like, there is certain disbelief, but I mean, there's still kind of a seed of belief in what God's going to do, but we still think we can do this.
But he's gonna contribute something to it, and he's gonna, like, and I would say, like, it shows, like Abram is impatient because God doesn't always give what he promises, like, right away. Like, this is, like, Abram is a perfect example. Like, Abram is like a name it and claim it. Like, he's a prosperity gospel guy at this point. He's like, hey, I'm going to claim that promise and I'm going to make it happen, But no,
honestly,
like, the Lord,
I think is a lot of our hearts too. Abraham's heart is my heart. We're like, you know what, God? I know what you say is true, but can you give it to me a little faster?
Exactly.
Timeline.
Like, God gives him the promise, but God does it on his own timing. And it's like, we got to learn to be patient and rest in that. Like, that's what, So the language of, like, faith, of resting and receiving is so important for us as Christians. Like, we should identify with Abraham. We really should. But not just in, like, the quote unquote positive, the blessings, the good stuff. Like, no, we got to identify with him and his, like, he's a sinner just like you and me.
If I can butt into,
Danny and I are just going for it, but Nick needs to talk.
There's just some notes I've taken based on just kind of reading this section as well. And again, we kind of we're focusing a little bit more, but not limited to just initially 12 through 25 Abraham's story. But based on what you guys were just talking about, I wrote this down earlier, is that, I feel like a perceived connection between Eve convinces Adam to eat the forbidden fruit, and then Sarah convincing Abraham to have a child with Hagar, his concubine.
It's the same story, but two different eras.
Which is the section we're talking about. And then Israel demanding their first king to be Saul, we'll talk about later in later episodes, all not trusting God in his timing in his ways instead of doing things our way. So yeah, there's like extra examples of God's chosen people who we'd say are saved and elect, but they keep messing up and forcing our ways and our terms of agreement.
It's as if the covenant of grace doesn't rely on your, my, or Danny's obedience.
Right. Yeah. So
For those who aren't looking, Danny just put up a little, like a whoa emoji. Yeah, I don't know what that thing's called.
But yeah, I thought it was an interesting connection. I've always thought about that when you hear about Sarai telling Abram, "Hey, you know what? I'm barren. I can't have a child. I'm old. Go sleep with Hagar, my servant, so we can have this child that we're supposed to be, promised through your line." And they think that that's the way they're going to do it, but it's showing a lack of trust in God's timing, like you said, Peter. He
which is all of us.
Yeah. But that's also what I wanted to say. Sarah's barrenness becoming pregnant is really improbability in human terms, and it's also pointing to Mary's virginity impossibility in human terms to conceiving Jesus Christ, right?
Which is exactly what Paul says in Galatians 4, because he uses Isaiah 54, which is a servant song about basically Sarah's barrenness.
The barren woman.
He compares. He doesn't. I don't think he compares her directly to Mary, but he compares the two covenants to the barrenness and to the kind of the fruitfulness, and saying, kind of humans, we look at the fruitfulness and we think that's where we get all of our blessing from. But it's like, you know what? Actually, the covenant of grace comes from barrenness. It comes from human inability to obey, to do anything according to God's promise. We just believe. That's it.
Yeah. It's just like that overall theme of we see in scripture lots of times throughout the Old Testament foreshadowing Christ, the Messiah, with a woman who's barren and like an impossibility of a birth.
Yep.
And then it's like, and then you get to that story in the Annunciation, like when the angel tells Mary it's going to happen. And it's amazing, like, to show like there's similarities, also contrast, because Mary in faith says, may it be to me as you've said. There's a faith there, right? She's trusting that the Lord is going to do this without her consummating her marriage to Joseph.
Yeah. It's not that it's impossible for her to have a kid, but she has no husband. So she does have a husband, but it's not through her husband that this is going to come from.
Yeah. And then that phrase that, everybody wrenches out of context and puts it on bumper stickers and t-shirts and whatever. It's like, with God, with man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Like, that encapsulates like the whole covenant that God makes with Abram and Sarai, and it culminates in the Messiah, their seed. Like, hey, this is impossible with you. Like, it's not about you taking a concubine. It's not about you like making it happen, doing your own thing. Like, it's not about you covering yourself up with fig leaves. No, the Lord's going to do this work. Like, with God, it's possible.
I got a question for you guys too on this that'll help the audience. I know the answer, but I can't articulate it as well as especially Danny, probably Peter. But
thanks.
Why he's just seasoned, but no, I'm sure you guys could do both better than me. But so why? So just backing up for a second, Ishmael is the child of Hagar and Abraham for the audience, so you guys know what I'm talking about. And Isaac is the child of Sarai and Abraham. So my question is, why is the promise through Isaac and not Ishmael?
I could take a stab at this one first, because that's what Paul tells us. Paul kind of interprets this for us in Galatians. It's because Ishmael is a result of human work. That's he's the one that Abraham and Hagar they decided to get together and have, and so through human work, through human obedience, nothing's possible. That's also not what God had told them. And through Isaac is the one who comes from human barrenness, human impossibility. So the gospel of grace comes through human impossibility, not through human possibility.
Amen. Yeah. No, that's good. Hitting that answer on a different angle, so people understand that even though Ishmael and Hagar were blessed and taken care of by God, the promise isn't going through.
Yeah, she meets an angel at the well and they're taken care of. Doesn't mean that the son is part of the promise.
Right. And then so tying this really closely to talking about Isaac, such a fascinating and scary part of scripture, where Abraham is told by God to go sacrifice his son. I mean, and God even calls him his only son, where you're like, wait, I thought, what about Ishmael? But anyway, he takes Isaac up and he thinks he's going to sacrifice him. Obviously, this is pointing towards the atonement in some way. Can you guys help answer that passage where what's going on? Abraham is told by God to go sacrifice his, like, Isaac's probably 12 years old, go up there and kill him. And then, but the angel of the Lord stops him, obviously, and he sees a ram that's perfect to sacrifice. So what's going on with that?
I'm gonna let Danny answer this because he's working on the commentary through Hebrews, and Hebrews gives us the answer.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess to cut to the chase of the New Testament interpretation, Hebrews 11 tells us that, people usually, like, we look at that story and, there's this, there's language of son, my only son. Like, there's always like
Highly
Abraham
charged
is
language.
Abraham's like heaping up all this language, my son, my only son, the son I love, which is awesome. And then you have like, this father sacrificing his son. So obviously we see like types and shadows there. The ram that God provides, the sacrificial animal, right there. But in Hebrews 11, the writer tells us that Abraham was willing to go through with it because he believed that God could raise the dead.
Yep.
So like, and like, I think there's like, just like what Peter just said about like, covenant of works, covenant of grace, and, things that we do, things that God does. Like, I think there's like, it's not so subtle, but there's something there about, it's not that Abraham was so obedient. Yeah, he's obedient. Yeah, he listens. Yes, he believes. But why?
He has hope.
He's going through. Yeah, he's willing to go through
Trust
it because
in the promise of God.
By this point, he knows that Isaac is the seed of the woman.
He knows God doesn't lie and God doesn't go back on his promise.
And God has shown that to him, like, how many times? Right? Because we don't, like, we gotta, like, don't forget, like, when you get from like chapter the birth of, actually the birth of Isaac, chapter 21, like, right, the actual covenants and so forth are made, like, this is like 25 years later. Like, it's only a couple of chapters, but it's like, this is like, 2 decades,
long time
or more after God made the initial promise. So he's learned through like hard experience, but also through faith and through God's revelation, that this God is able to raise the dead. And so if this God is able to raise the dead, if I do what he says, I know that he's going to raise up Isaac. So now at this point, he's kind of like, we see the growth in faith that Abraham has had. Beforehand, he was like, oh yeah, God's got his, promises, and I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to make the promise come true. I'm going to take a concubine. I'm going to lie about my wife. Like, but then by the end, sort of, of the narrative, towards the end of the narrative, he now is so trusting the Lord that he doesn't do anything other than just obey the Lord, and trust that God is going to make it happen regardless. Like, hey, God can raise the dead. This God who's made all things out of nothing can raise the dead. And so if I sacrifice my son, I know that God is going to do what he said, like, regardless. So,
wow. That's really helpful, because a lot of non-Christians, some like people that really dislike Christianity, love to use that passage to be like, oh, if God told you to kill your son, like told Abraham, would you go through with it? And they use that to try to pit us into a corner.
Because I think the assumption is Isaac would just be dead, and Abraham trusts that no, God's promise is truer than my fear of losing my son, because I know if I sacrifice Isaac, that the Lord will raise him up again.
Yeah, and I would say, like, just as an apologetic point, like, to the unbeliever who brings up that objection, which we probably all heard at some point or another. Like, first of all, I don't think God is going to ask me to do that.
No.
And secondly, the answer why is because, like, I'm not the patriarch of the seed of promise. Like, why would God ask me he asked this of Abraham, because this is the line of promise. Like, there's something specific in particular about this that's unrepeatable. So no, I don't think I get voices in my head. Like, anyone who claims otherwise, like, they probably don't, really have the right God, or they might be mentally ill. I don't know. But
Yeah.
God is not going to ask Christians to do this because this is a once for all thing to point forward to Christ.
Exactly.
It's nothing to do with us and our personal faith.
Yeah.
And that's not that. I think like we can make it that in our preaching or teaching, like, are you willing to listen to God, and how far are you willing to go, and that kind of thing. That's not what it's about at all. This is about redemptive history and about the promise of bringing us to a Savior, a seed of the woman.
Yeah. And maybe to help real quick, and I would not use this with non-Christians because they're not going to know these categories, but for Christians, maybe to train them up a little bit, the difference, two fancy kind of Latin phrases, historia and ordo salutis. Historia is kind of describing the history of redemption, and ordo is kind of the order of our own salvation, something like we would do in some sense partake of. And the sacrifice or the near sacrifice of Isaac is part of historia salutis. It's just describing history of redemption, but it's not kind of descriptive of our own salvific kind of promise or salvific kind of circumstances. It is historical, and it plays into our understanding of salvation, but is not part of our own kind of salvation experience.
Yeah, like I would say, Christian, you're not like Christian. You don't have to prove yourself to God.
No,
you don't have to do in Abraham with Isaac like moment in your life in order for you to be secure in your redemption. That's not what it's about at all. So like get that out of your head. Like, so if an unbeliever asks you, or even
it was
even if
proven for you in the death and resurrection of Christ.
That's right.
You have to do this to prove it to God.
So it's like, well, would you go through with sacrificing your own son if God said? Well, God wouldn't ask me that, first of all, and secondly, He's already done it.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and it's just the
done.
point of like redemptive history, exactly, like on the aftermath part of that story, or like as soon as the angel of the Lord steps in and says, "No, don't do it," because he was always planning on stopping him, and then he provides him a perfect sacrifice. It's pointing
a ram sacrifice.
He says, I am the father that's going to provide my son a sacrifice, not you. I'm not going to ask you to do it, and I didn't let you follow through with it. So it's a way of pointing forward to Christ in like a few different ways, which is brilliant. The only way God could do it.
Yeah, and we'll get to it too, but rams play a pretty big role in the Levitical sacrificial system too. Which will help us figure out what's happening with Abraham as well.
Yeah, I'm just disappointed that nobody busted out Jehovah Jireh, my provider. His grace is sufficient for me.
That's a song I never learned.
Oh, you did? Oh, come on,
I learned the father Abraham.
Father Abraham, Jehovah Jireh. Come on now. Come on.
Yeah. You're just holier than I
am. Well, also you brought up something important. Like we hear Abraham is called the father of faith. And that's and also the point that Danny and Peter, can you help explain why looking at the redemptive history with talking about Abraham, how we can see justification as faith alone through how God works with Abraham?
Because it certainly ain't by Abraham's works. He does nothing to merit what he's been told to do. And you get Genesis 15:6. And his faith was imputed to him as righteousness. And you start looking around. I was like, oh, I wonder what Abraham did. And then you realize, like, oh, all Abraham basically does is sleeps, lies, and gives away his wife.
He's messed up.
And the promise is not based off of Abraham's righteousness. It's based off his faith, and that is imputed to him as righteousness. So work is imputed to him. Obedience is imputed to him. Doesn't come from Abraham alone.
Because it shows that he sins after he has been saved.
Oh, he sins all over the place from Genesis 12 to Genesis 25.
Messes up. And not
he has
only
like one act of obedience basically in Genesis 22, and that's essentially it.
And also Abraham's family is pretty dysfunctional.
We'll get into Abraham's family even after this.
I mean, it's not like, oh, this is everyone is a stand-up perfect character in the line of Christ. It's like, no, these are messed up sinners like you and I.
You get that Genesis 26 to 36. You're like, oh, this is not a good line. This is not kind of the paragon of faith that I thought it was.
Well, and speaking of that, I got two more questions on this third section. So, because this is really important. First one, you brought it up earlier, so this might be a really brief answer. But what's the significance of Abraham? This is like, it makes me like almost in a weird way laugh when I hear how he gave his wife away? Like, why did she?
Gave her
how did
twice,
she even?
not just once.
Yeah, how did
Yep.
she even find that to be a good idea? Oh yeah, say you're my sister, and then Isaac does the same thing. What in the heck
Yeah.
is going on here?
We're
They're giving their
sinners.
wives away.
Yeah, we wanted to, we think we could take the promise ourselves. We're like, oh, I think, yeah, God promised me, but you know what? I can do it too.
Is it because they're fearing man and thinking that they're going to protect their own skin by
Yeah.
being like, no,
It's
yeah,
because
this
they're
is my
it's because they're
sister.
sinners. It's because we're all sinners. That's what
God
we all
didn't,
do.
yeah, God didn't choose holy people to accomplish his holy purposes. God
Yeah.
chose what he had. God used what he had to work with. You know, we
And he
might say
protects his line.
to do his thing. Like God is going to do his thing. He's going to have
God
to use
protects
a
his
bunch of-
line, even though the
Yeah.
line does not want to be protected.
Yep.
There we go. Yeah, because he even tries to give his line away, his
Yeah.
own wife.
Many
And
times.
Isaac the same way. And God's like, nope, we're going to correct that. I'm going to even speak to,
Yeah. So we could,
Pharaoh.
yeah, I guess you could say it's like, yes, fear of God, yes, or yes, fear of man, all that stuff. But I mean, even foundationally, it's like all God has to work with are sinners. So it's
Okay.
not like these perfectly God-fearing people. He's got sinners to work with.
So that's what we can take away. So before we move on, this is a huge person to talk about first within this first third. Melchizedek.
Hmm.
What is going on here? He blesses Abram, and he's got a very mysterious description about him. He's a king of Salem, which is going forward is going to be translated to Jerusalem. So what's going on? Melchizedek, a lot of people, it might be the first time people have even heard about him. So I won't over explain. I'll let you guys introduce him to the audience and how he points to Christ, most importantly.
Well, Hebrews 7 says he points to Christ because he has no father.
We've answered the New Testament to help us with the Old Testament.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah,
Answer a
exactly.
question. Answer it.
I mean, so he just shows up and he's the priest of Salem. He's king of righteousness.
Yep.
Or
He
no, the other
blesses
way around,
Abraham.
right? Yeah. And Hebrews 7 tells us that, he has no father or mother, no genealogy. Well, why does Hebrews 7 say that? Well, the simplest answer is this, because the text doesn't say that.
Yeah, it just doesn't describe where he comes from.
Everybody in Genesis so far, has a genealogy.
Yeah.
There's lines of genealogy, right? Like we've seen that last time. Like there's all these genealogy lines.
Outside of Adam, everyone has a genealogy.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden this guy shows up and we're never told about his, where does he come from? Like no father, no mother, no genealogy. And then that's why Hebrews 7 says, he doesn't have beginning of days or end of life, because like everybody else, like Genesis 5, and he died. He lived this many years and he died. Like Melchizedek, we're never told that when he was born, how long he lived, when he died. So according to just closely reading the text, no father, mother, genealogy, no beginning, no end. Was he a Superman? Did he show up out of nowhere? Is it the Son of God and human? No, like the text that never tells us that. It just, so there are authors arguing from silence.
Yeah.
To say, in these ways, he resembles the Son of God.
Yep.
And then he goes on to say, hey, Abraham gave tithes, 1/10 of the spoils to Melchizedek. In the line of, in the loins, in the seed of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons was Levi.
Yep.
Therefore, through that reasoning, Levi himself, the line of the Old Testament priesthood, gave tithes to Melchizedek. Jesus is a priest, not according to the order of Levi, because he's from the tribe of Judah.
Yep.
But Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Oh, and by the way, Levi is less than Melchizedek. Melchizedek is greater than Levi. Therefore, the priesthood of Christ, the Melchizedekian priesthood, is greater than the line of Levi's. That's the whole thing that he's trying to prove.
Yeah.
So he's a type and a shadow of the Son of God. We don't have to even say he's a the Son of God. I mean, we can say that. We don't have to say that.
Yeah.
I think just without even saying that, we still see that he resembles, as Hebrews 7 says, the Son of God, and he points forward to a greater priesthood to come. That's not going to need sacrifice for oneself. That's not going to come to an end. He has this endless life. Yep. And so does Jesus, because he was raised from the dead.
Yeah. Only tiny little thing I'd add to it. I think Danny said that better than I ever could have. putting all Psalm 110, Genesis 14, and Hebrews 7 all together, wrapped up in one.
The only
Only
three
I could
places
add
that he's
is-
mentioned in the whole Bible, right?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add is Jesus, in order for him to be a priest after Melchizedek, can't be born of the line of Levi, because the line of Levi is the one that like continually dies and can only offer sacrifice until he
That's right.
dies, versus the line after the order of Melchizedek comes not from Levi, nor it comes from any generation before or after him. So he can make a forever sacrifice, versus the Levitical priests can only make temporary sacrifices. Even in the line he comes from connotes an eternal sacrifice versus temporary sacrifices.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
We don't need to talk about all the debates about who Melchizedek is like it's as far as the point of
Basically
is he
nobody knows
actually,
who Melchizedek is. It's
Yeah,
just
nobody
a
knows.
conjecture.
some people think he's the pre-incarnate Christ. Some
Yeah.
people just like, but we can chalk it up as he is definitely pointing to Christ in a very
Definitely.
important way.
Yep.
But you can just kind of stop there and
He's like the Tom Bombadil of the Lord of the Rings. Like nobody really knows who he is.
That's right. You're given just enough information to where it's dangerous to start looking into all these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he points to him in a very important way.
There
So
you go.
going on, I want to talk about Genesis 26 through 36, more Abraham's offspring, primarily Jacob and Esau. This is actually something that I find and many people find interesting, is there's repeated themes of siblings early in the Bible and throughout, specifically brothers even. First it's Cain and Abel, then it's Isaac and Ishmael, then it's Jacob and Esau, and then Joseph and his 11 brothers. So what's God telling us here through, is it like sibling rivalry? Is it just
all brothers shouting in one are like, amen. Yeah, we hate our brothers.
So Jacob and Esau, what's going on there? How's it point this in the further line going towards the line of Christ?
I'll start with a quick
Peter?
little
Yeah.
crack. That's I think first and foremost, you basically have a repeat of Cain and Abel with Jacob and Esau. Not the exact same thing, but I mean you have a lie from Jacob, and Esau is kind of the hairy one, and he puts on. I think I have these names right. I don't have the Bible in front of me, so I don't have the answer sheet in front of me. But
just so you guys know, Jacob and Esau are Isaac's
correct
children.
So you have sibling strife, which then leads to not one who dies and the other one who does, but one who's scared of being killed by Esau. So he runs away to a foreign land, which is not too dissimilar than what you get from Cain and Abel, although Cain does kill Abel. And then Cain runs to a foreign land. So you have a lot of parallel stories, and so you kind of wonder, is the same thing happening is history repeating itself? Is sin repeating itself through this line again? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And I've always, when I've preached through Genesis, said that the story of Abraham shows us about faith and the struggles of faith, and how justified sinners still are sinners after being justified. And then the story of Jacob, I mean, Isaac gets kind of like short shrift in the narrative. He gets kind of passed over, but the story of Jacob is the story of like the invincibility, the irresistibility of God's grace.
Yeah.
Like he runs as far as he can run away from Esau, and he's just, he's afraid and so forth. And his whole life has been like, he's wrestled in the womb. He's like grabbed the heel. Like he's, there's all this like stuff about him. But it's about God's grace. Like God pursues him.
Consistently pursued by Yahweh.
Yeah. Over
and over, even after he does so many dumb things.
To the point where like, so strangely, like God wrestles with Jacob.
Yeah. Genesis 32. Yeah.
Like, what's that all about?
Why is his name changed to Israel? What's that all about?
Yeah, that's maybe like, so I actually heard a really good episode. This is maybe 2.5 years ago from White Horse Inn. Shane Rosenthal talked about Jacob's wrestling, and then the touch of the angel on the hip, which is kind of like a
hip socket,
kind of like a Hebrew euphemism for your groin. That's like your generative parts. I won't go further than that. So he gets touched on his generative parts.
Hit there once and twice before playing whatever. It's
that's right. Yeah. So and that's kind of point. And when he gets that, he gets maimed. And so there's kind of a biblical theological point too, where like that is where his seed comes from, and that is where
Yep.
he's maimed by this angel. And like, I mean, for real, listeners who are listening right now, and for us, like, who do you like? I mean, legit, like, who do you think's actually going to win between a fight between Jacob and a freaking angel? Like, that's all day, every day. That's an angel. Like, angel's going to win. That's like they're going to beat humans, but the angel takes the loss to Jacob, which is kind of strange.
Well, and again, an angel of the Lord, a lot of people say, is actually the pre-incarnate Christ.
Well, Jacob does say that he saw the face of God.
Yep. Jacob says it himself.
So, I mean, I don't think it's a far stretch as a Christian to say this is the pre-incarnate son. This is the Son of God before his incarnation.
The text tells us pretty close to it, then I think we're relatively
confident. But God, so God is wrestling, and God takes the L.
Yeah, which is
like, what's that all about?
Yeah, he's the one who's takes the L and then blesses Jacob.
Yeah,
like, oh, that's kind of sounds a little similar to God on the cross, quote unquote, taking the loss, taking the defeat, quote unquote, from humans, and then blessing humans in his defeat.
Yeah, and just to point it back to Abraham, like, God, like, he blesses him, he changes his name, he's keeping that line of promise going. Right? Like, that's the big point, is like the Lord is doing this strange story is all about, again, like this, that the line of the promised seed is going to come through Jacob.
And Jacob at this point, Jacob is running. He's not obeying what he's supposed to. He's running, and then the angel catches him in the middle of the night. In the midst of his rebellion.
It's showing you God is going to fulfill his purposes, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, it's like, this is not about like, how are you going to wrestle angels in your life? And how are you going to like wrestle blessings from God? It's like, no, this is you in the midst of your rebellion, when you're farthest, you think you're farthest away from God. God still comes, and then he shows you his scars and says, I have taken the defeat for you. Let me bless you.
Not only that, I don't know if we brushed over it, but Jacob was a scoundrel. He cheated. He really tricked and cheated his blessing from out of Esau, giving him a pot of stew and making him. I mean, Esau kind of fell into it. Obviously,
he sells his firstborn rights for a pot of stew.
But then he tricks his father Isaac to, it pretends to has a hairy hand, and
sounds a little like the serpent to me. Sounds a little bit like somebody who's trying to trick for a blessing.
He's a sinner. Like, that's the point, right? He's a sinner.
Exactly.
God saves sinners. Like, if people don't understand that yet, like, the Christian faith is that God saves sinners, and
we who are that's me. I'm a rebeller against God, who runs away against God. Even though I trust God, I still run against God. And Jacob runs against God. He essentially believes nothing, and then he is touched in the hip by the angel. The angel's like, I'll take a loss from you, but then I'm going to bless you and name you Israel.
Yep.
Like, what's his name changed? What's the significance of his name? I mean, we go to Abraham, then becomes Abraham. Mm-hmm. We go Sarai becomes Sarah. And why does Jacob become Israel? Why is his name changed that way?
Maybe I'll take a stab and see if Danny agrees with me, but I think this is also this goes a little bit. I don't know how to describe this. I don't mean editing so much the Pentateuch, but like, you look at Jacob and you see a little bit of Israel in the wilderness. You see them running away from God. You see him and a single person kind of representing a whole people, and you see the same thing with Israel in the wilderness. You see them, a corporate people. Picturing us as sinners, a single sinner. You see the same thing, but reverse with Jacob.
Yeah. And cool. Any more comments on?
You also got Jacob's ladder, which is a whole big thing.
Oh yeah.
Too, which is Genesis 28. Yeah, which is
we skipped that one. Yeah.
When he sleeps on a rock, he goes to, again. This is I've already hearing this from Dr. Horton on White Horse and in class. A lot of good things happen when humans can't do anything, when we're asleep. Like all the good stuff that God promises us, or when humans are knocked out.
Go take a nap, everybody.
Exactly. And he
so
sees
like the Jacob's ladder. I mean, ladder, first of all, is problematic.
Because this last time we kind of see something like this is the Tower of Babel.
It's Tower of Babel. Like, so he has this dream of like, whatever the staircase thing, ladder, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's
essentially the same thing.
I think it's basically he has this vision of this ziggurat.
Yeah.
This looks like a staircase, a walkway, whatever you want to call it, up to heaven. And the amazing thing is, of course, it's the Lord. And
Who is at the top of it?
There's textual variant, and there's like different way to translate the word, but like either the Lord's at the top of it or the Lord's next to Jacob.
Yep.
But the point is, like, it's the Lord who's descending.
Yep.
It's the Lord who's coming down.
Not humans ascending to Yahweh, but Yahweh descending.
Yeah. So it's the opposite of
he reverses Babel. Yeah, in Genesis.
It's the opposite of like any human works. It's God who reveals himself and says, this is not a staircase up to me. This is a staircase down to you.
Yeah.
And God comes down, and the language again of like blessing, being with him, so on and so forth. Like, and that's why when Jesus in John chapter 1, I think it's in John chapter 1, isn't it? Where he says, I think, isn't it to Nathaniel? He says, I should have had this written down. But you're going to see the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man.
Yeah, it's sorry, I just preached on this. Yeah, this is John 1, like,
is it 151, right?
John 1, like 50-ish.
151, there it is. Yeah, 151. So like, he tells Nathaniel,
he tells the Nathan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nathan's the one who had just told Jesus, does anything good come out of Nazareth?
That's right.
Jesus responds basically approvingly and telling him that he has no deceit, and then tells him about Jacob's ladder with the Son of Man attached to it.
Yeah, he's like, oh, does anything come good out of Nazareth? He's like, oh, I'll tell you what comes good out of Nazareth. The Son of God,
Son of Man.
Yeah, coming down to you. Yeah, Son of Man coming down to you, like the glorious God, like of Daniel chapter 7, is coming down to you, and angels are ascending and descending, like, and that's the crazy thing, like the metaphor gets switched, like Jesus, the Son of Man, Jesus is the ladder.
Yep.
He is the staircase. Like he
is our ascent to the Lord.
So, as he says later on, like, I'm the way, right? I'm the way, truth, life. Like Jesus is the way, and the angels are ascending and descending upon him. It's just crazy. So,
yep, there you go. And again, beautiful. Who is this ladder envisioned to? It's not the righteous one who deserves, quote unquote, Yahweh's visitation, but it's again, Jacob had just left, I think, from fleeing from Esau. And then he sees this vision after falling asleep on a rock. Yep. And then Yahweh's like, I'm with you. To the freaking rebel, he says, I'm with you.
Yep. Good. So we've talked a lot about, obviously, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now we're going to talk about going into the last section of 37 through 50. Joseph now. Yeah. Jacob's 12 sons.
Yep.
We hear about the 12 tribes of Israel. That's clue right there. But including the two really important ones there, Joseph and Judah. Yep. So this section of Genesis 12 through 50 is all about one family, obviously Abraham and his family line, how it continues on all the way to Jesus, and we're included into that. We are sons of Abraham's our father. We are children of Abraham by the faith, by the Spirit. So what's the Let's talk about Joseph and Judah, actually, but the narrative of Joseph's story in 37 through 50.
Yeah, maybe I'll start this off real quick, and I'll just do a quick little transition. But you get Cain and Abel in Genesis 4, then you get Jacob and Esau in Genesis 26 and 27, and then you get Joseph and his brothers in Genesis 37. And to be honest, Joseph kind of sounds like a little bit of a dweeb, because he tells his brothers, like, I got these great visions. He be real. If your brother were to tell you, like, you're gonna bow down to me, I can't imagine you're like, this sounds pretty good to me.
He's like a little spoiled brat. They kind of look at him as.
He does. I mean, of course, these are visions from Yahweh, but like, think about it from his brother's perspective. That's like, I can imagine being a little frustrated and like, yeah, you kind of think highly of yourself, but there's strife between brothers again. You have this thing replayed over and over again, that the seed, they come and have strife with one another once again to kick off the end of Genesis.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. And I'm just surprised you didn't mention his Technicolor Dreamcoat, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting for that. It just shows that he's daddy's boy and his favorite, and he's favorite, a spoiled little brat.
If I'm not, and I remember reading this, I actually got this from two sources. The guys, it's either Matt or Sam Amati, I forget which one wrote, From Prisoner to Prince, which is in the New Studies in Biblical Theology series, which is a fantastic book, which is Genesis 37 to 50. And then Jim Hamilton's typology book, and he covers this as well. I think he talks, I don't have the Hebrew in front of me, but I think he talks about the Technicolor coat is like a kingly kind of throw. It's a purple cloak. It's placed on like the firstborn, the one who's going to receive all the privileges, the one who's going to rule and reign.
Yeah.
But
So yeah, I mean, obviously he's like antagonizing them. He's kind of a little brat, but then
Right.
but then they're also jealous,
Yeah, they're jealous.
right? And so like just like Cain, they're jealous.
It's exactly the same story. Yeah.
You know, Cain was jealous that Abel was sacrifice was accepted, and in this case, the brothers are jealous that Joseph been accepted by the father more than they have.
Which is Esau has the firstborn right, and so Jacob gets jealous of Esau, and so he's like, hey, sell it to me for a bowl of lentil soup.
So
same thing, like you said, with Joseph and his brothers.
Yep, and they're going, they had this plan to kill him, but then it's Judah who has the Judah's the lesser of a sinner, right? Judah's like a better sinner. He comes up with like the more like clean version. He's like, well, let's not kill him, but like let's sell him into slavery. Let's at least make some money off this guy.
Yeah, which is that like better or?
Like and they sell him into slavery, and it's like he becomes a slave. First of all, the Midianite traders, and then those Midianites, those who are Ishmaelites, by the way, like that's what a Midianite was an Ishmaelite.
From the line of Ishmael. Yep.
So they then go down to Egypt and sell him into slavery into Potiphar's house as a household slave.
And the story of Potiphar. If I'll put this book in, I've thought of it just now. Danny, have you read Robert Alter's work on narrative?
A long time ago.
It is like it transformed the way I looked at Joseph, especially with how Joseph is treated, and then he starts looking a little different than the patriarchs before him because he does something very different than Abraham does. Where Abraham gives away his wife, and Joseph is presented by the Pharaoh's daughter. Or Pharaoh's wife. I forget the relation. For I think it's Tamar. I think. I don't have this is straight from memory. But he's offered basically to have sex with a woman who's in a very high power.
Yeah, Potiphar's wife.
Yeah, Potiphar's wife. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's offered, by Potiphar's wife. Well, hey, take from me. She sounds a little like Eve or the serpent. Like, hey, take from my tree, my fruits. This is free. This is yours. I'm going to give you this good stuff. And you expect, like everybody else, for Joseph to take it. And then he doesn't. You're like, oh, this is a little different.
And he experiences suffering for that temporarily.
Exactly. Yeah, he experiences suffering because then she sells him out because I think she takes a fringe of his garment, I think.
Yep. He runs away. She grabs his garment, eats a little shred of it. Potiphar comes back home. She's like, hey, this guy broke in today and tried to rape me. Who? And you're like, oh, this person wears this garment, and they find out it's Joseph, and throw him into the gulag.
Yeah. So for his, you could say for his righteous act, his righteous decision, unlike Abraham, who was unrighteous, of course, throughout his, and so is Joseph, but he chose a righteous act. But for his righteous act of not taking, quote unquote, from the fruit of the tree, which is from Tamar, not taking her into his bed, he suffers. He goes down. Which then it sounds a little like somebody we know.
But then God uses that in obviously Joseph doesn't stay in prison and he has dreams and stuff and gets brought out.
I'm not mistaken too. I think he's thrown down into prison too. There's descending
the language. The language of going down is so his it's metaphorical. His status has gone down. Like, I mean, he's a slave, but now he's even lower than a slave. Like he's a prisoner.
Yeah.
Right. And like everybody in this prison, like, is basically on death row.
Yep.
So like the awesome thing is, like, if you're just reading a story, you never read the whole story yourself yet and got to the end. Like, if you know the end, it makes more sense. Like, Joseph cannot die.
Yep.
If he dies, the line of Israel is dead.
Done. Yeah.
So like, you don't know that going in, but like, as you read the story, it comes clearer at the very, very end, where it's like, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, to preserve, right, people.
Yep.
So like, he has to survive. So he can't die in that. His brothers can't kill him, so they don't kill him. They kill an animal. They spill his blood all over his Technicolor dream coat. Get to the dad. Dad thinks he's dead. Sell him into slavery. The Midianites won't kill him. Get sold to the Potiphar's house. Potiphar, his wife. He didn't get killed right away.
No.
He gets thrown in prison.
Which, can you imagine, like if somebody sleeps with Potiphar's wife, I have to imagine like he's dead on the spot.
Yeah. And like, so he gets put in this prison, and there's people there, and like all of a sudden he somehow gets this gift from God to interpret dreams.
Yep.
And then these prisoners have these weird dreams.
Yep.
And he's interpreting these dreams, right? And eventually, like, one of these dudes, like, literally gets his head taken off, right? His head's lifted up. So
you
like,
start wondering, is this about to happen to our friend Joseph?
Yeah. So it's like you think Joseph is toast, like, but the whole thing is like, so he gets put down, then he gets raised up. But like if you know the end, like, you can understand the beginning, like he has to survive. God, quote unquote, has to preserve him to preserve the line. And so goes, as it goes with Joseph, so it goes with the line. So it's really awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he literally goes from he's the righteous one whom the promise comes through. He's sold for his righteous act of obedience, not taking the fruit. He's pushed down into the earth. Like, again, the kind of metaphorical descending into
he's buried.
Into the depths of hell, into the depths of sin and suffering, and with other of people who are dying, like literally or dying in front of him. And then he's saved, or he's ascends back up to the right hand of the person in power.
That's right. Yeah.
He starts seeing why the biblical authors talk about Christ's righteousness, his obedience, his death, resurrection, and the way that they do, and how the psalmists talk about Sheol and the depths and Hades the way that they do as well, because they're reading these stories and they're like, oh, I see what's going on.
And even the language of like Joseph has all authority and power in the land of Egypt.
Given to him by the
all
Pharaoh.
authority has been given to him. In his resurrected, ascended state, like he's ascended up out of the earth, and he's now at the right hand. All authority is his. Like he can do whatever he wants.
He's the Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, and that's
another movie reference, Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. It's hard not to think of the cartoon.
But you get that you get the commandment given to Adam that you be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and have dominion over it. Like, you're the one who exercises authority. And at the end of Genesis, you finally do get somebody who starts exercising some of this authority because he starts becoming, you can say, obedient to his the righteous call of God.
Okay, a couple questions here. There's obviously 12 children from Jacob / Israel, so it's like, that connects. Like, Israel, the man Israel, had 12 sons. 12 tribes of Israel. That makes sense. The eldest is Reuben. A lot of them are like half siblings because of he had 2 different wives, but Reuben
and 2 concubines.
Yep.
Don't forget the concubines.
We kind of brushed over
that whole thing again.
But my question is, we obviously see the preserved story of redemption pointing to Christ through Joseph, but then what about Judah? His brother Judah. There's that significance pointing to Christ.
You get Genesis 49 too with the promise to Judah.
So is it through Joseph, or is Jesus through the line of Judah or Joseph?
Yeah, through the line of Judah, but Joseph Joseph is also a typological. I mean, we can say, Saul is typological of Christ. It's not just the actual line people. It's people, like, there's lots of types and shadows of a coming king and savior and whatnot. So, but yeah, Judah is the line through which Jesus comes. And, that's the line of the kings. That's what Genesis 49 tells us. And there's that language of like the scepter not departing. And then like Peter mentioned earlier, there's a lot of euphemism and it's cleaned up into English, but it says like, the scepter won't depart from Judah, the ruler's staff from between his feet. Like, what does that mean, between his feet? It means his genitals.
Yeah.
Like,
this is
the seed, power. Like, through the seed of Judah, the line of the kings is going to come.
Sometimes our English translations smooth out what they perceive as PG. Kind of uncouth language, and you're like, no, actually, we kind of need that language to figure out.
Adam knew his wife, like that language of knowing. Like, that's what it says. Yada is the Hebrew. Like, no, but what does that mean? Like, they had sex.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
they knew each other in the most personal of ways. Like
Us cleaning up this language,
So, yeah.
it makes it harder for us to see some of these connections to what the Bible is
Yeah.
doing.
So yeah, that line of the kings is not going to depart from between his feet, from his seed, until variously translated, but like the Shiloh, quote unquote Shiloh promise, right?
Yep.
But to him, all the obedience of all the nations. And then you have this language of like this colt, this donkey's colt, is tied up, which brings us to like Zechariah 9, brings us to the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Jesus.
John 12.
And this typological language of like his garments are like colored in red wine, and so forth. Like, what's that all about? It's like blood language. Like it's like he's dipped himself in the wrath, of his enemies, and his wrath is like dipped his clothes into the
not
blood
too
of his
unlike
enemies.
Joseph that we just saw in Genesis 37:38.
That's right. So, but like, unlike Joseph, like this is the actual king. Like this is the actual savior.
Joseph,
so we're getting like
kind of prefigured it, and then Genesis 49 and 50 like points to the king.
And then even like God told Abram, I think it was in chapter 15, like you mentioned earlier, Peter, like kings are going to come from Abram, like lines of kings and kings of nations and so forth. So like,
and you get that promise in Genesis 49 that like this is actually going to happen.
It's actually going to happen. Like, so like we're getting a little like the flower of the promise is like opening up more. You're starting to see more of the petals. Like, hey, the seed of the woman is going to be like the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who's going to bless all the world. How's he going to do that? Well, he's going to be a king. Like there's just now this king promise like gets like, I don't want to say added, but it starts to like fill itself out.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to reality until later on, of course, with Saul.
It just becomes clearer and clearer what's happening.
But like you're seeing more of the promise, like of the Messiah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to address that because some people might be thinking, wait a minute. Christ came through. Judah is one of Jesus's earthly fathers, not Joseph. But Joseph was a typological, real person. His story is pointing typologically to what Christ is to do in redemptive history. But Judah, Joseph's brother, is the line of kings. So not to read more into it, but I just want to clarify. So people understood so they're not confused or anything.
Well, you get to Genesis 49 because Joseph is the one who lives through his sufferings and is raised up to the right hand of Pharaoh with dominion over the earth. And then you get the Genesis 49 promise. You can say, I guess, as a result of Joseph's obedience.
Yeah, Joseph, like God, the Lord saved Israel because of Joseph. Through Joseph, on behalf of Joseph, and what the Lord has done through him. So and then you get to that promise of 49, and it's just amazing. So
there's been I don't know how much thought to put into this, but I think there has been a few, like a little bit of scholarship on Jesus's earthly father with Joseph and some of the connections between end of Genesis and with Joseph's name being Joseph. There's been some connections that I guess scholars, I don't know how much you want to put stock into it, but it is pretty interesting that Joseph's obedience at the end of Genesis 50 is somewhat there with Joseph being the earthly, not the seed father, but the earthly father of Jesus come the New Testament.
And Joseph, Jacob's son Joseph, we're talking about in Genesis, isn't the seed father of Jesus either, because it's Judah. So you're just seeing that both Josephs in Scripture are not seed human fathers of Jesus.
This is why you got to read a whole Bible in the context of itself. Even though it's hard, you got to read the whole Bible, or else these things get lost.
Anyway, I want to move on to something else. Two more brief questions. They're more statements, and then you guys can comment. But we see towards the end of Genesis 50 is the last chapter, but not at the last verse or anything, but within Genesis 50, you have the verse talking about what man meant for evil, God meant for good. So one of the most powerful verses and messages in the whole Bible, and it's something as Christians like we think about a lot through times of struggle and meaning of what's going on in the world and providence and that kind of thing. So why is it important that Genesis closes is with that message pretty much in Genesis 50 when we started with the origin story in Genesis 1?
I mean,
Danny answered this well. I want to see him answer it again.
I was just going to say that when I preached on this, it's interesting to me, at least, that the story of the creation story,
Yeah.
every day of creation,
It's
God
good.
saw what he had made, and it was good. And at the end of the creation week, it was very good.
Mhm.
But yet there's the serpent, there's Eve, there's Adam. They've brought evil into the world. And so it ends like, it's not that this
Like,
story is necessarily
It's
connected to
like
that, but like
it begins, yeah.
the idea of like, hey, this whole, like, the entire, like, this is their, like, his brothers meant evil and God meant it for good, but like, it's also true of everything, like that
Yeah.
God is able even to turn like the most wicked things towards the good, meaning the salvation of his people, whether it's a famine, whether it's fearing a pharaoh, whether it's like taking matters in your own hands to try to make God's promises come true, whether you're Jacob, you're literally running away from God. God has to find you and wrestle you at the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
everything
Mhm.
that is meant for evil, because of our sinfulness as a human race, like, God is able to turn it to good. Doesn't mean he always does,
Yeah.
but it means that he's able to. And in the case of his people, like for his redemptive purposes, he does turn even the wicked things
Yeah.
for good. So the murder of his very own son, Jesus, people meant it for evil, but yet God meant it for good.
Yeah.
That's so
And maybe
cool.
to help with this a little bit, it's because you want to keep it in context first and not kind of rip it and say, like, oh, this is a promise. Of course, this is a promise for all people. But you want to keep it in context first and see what is the good and what is the evil that are being described. And that's the seed.
Yep.
It's the seed will not be destroyed. What people are trying to do will be thwarted, and God's good purposes will come through. And then you can apply that to us kind of through that lens. But what I also wouldn't do is, like, I think some people have done this, and I think like the right hearts are there, but somebody's in the midst of kind of suffering. This is maybe not the first thing I would tell them is like, oh, like all things are gonna go
Yeah.
good, because they're gonna be like, well, it's not going good right now. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what God's doing. Like, you want to sit with them in that first, and
Yeah.
then listen to them, and then, I mean, grieve with them first.
Yeah.
And then as kind of like the light is at the end of the tunnel, then of course we go to promises. We still want to go to promises in the front end, but I think
Yeah.
Christians, rightly intentioned and wrongly applied, will go to this immediately and kind of brush off any suffering and say, well, go, it's all for good. When somebody who's going through really rough stuff, who just had a cancer diagnosis, who lost their job and stuff, like, you want to be with them in that first, and then go to
Yeah.
these promises with them as well.
Mourn with those who mourn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
One more thing I thought was really interesting, and let you guys respond to it, is that number 40 shows up again. This time
Uh-oh.
it's
Chuck
this
Missler
time-
rearing his head again.
yeah. So this time it's the amount of time Joseph instructs physicians to embalm his deceased father Jacob, aka Israel, for 40 days. So what do we see there?
I have no idea.
I don't have my notes or my commentary, but I'm pretty sure that was like standard practice in
That's
Egypt.
my guess. And some of these aren't
Yeah.
as mystical as we think they are. Some of it's just like, that's what you did.
Yeah, I had to find my no. I mean, I remember reading something of that and like tracking down some sources and whatnot. I'm pretty sure there was like a certain like period of time of mourning and like embalming and whatnot, for the death of like high officials, pharaohs and whatnot. So I'm
It could
pretty
have
sure
been like an ancient Middle Eastern practice that they did.
yeah,
That
But
sort
it's
of
not
looks
totally
like,
coincidental. I mean, it's got to point to the Exodus coming up, or the number 40s happen in the
sometimes you have to be careful with numbers unless the text makes it pretty clear that,
Yep.
hey, this is being used for a very specific typological purpose. This is where I think sometimes Spurgeon falls into some ruts, where he takes some fanciful allegorical stuff with some text I'm not terribly sure he should be taking, which, it might be there, and I might be totally kind of off. I'm not saying it's not, but sometimes it is a little coincidental that some of these numbers are in there, and what they may be
Well,
referring to.
I tend to think it might not be like there's something important to it, because it could be a totally different number. I think you don't have to read too much into it, but at the same time, you're like, oh, this is a reminder
Sure. Yeah.
that God is still at work, and this is pointing to Christ, and keeping the line going, because
Yeah.
Jacob, aka Israel, being embalmed for 40 days is like Israel, the nation after exile, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. I mean, we
What
hear the number
what verse
40.
is that again? By the way, just remind me.
I didn't write down the exact verses, but
So
numbers.
maybe
but
this might help too. It could be, but there might be a bigger, fuller purpose within the text that you want to run through versus one of the little strands, because it is something like one of the famous examples of what Spurgeon does with the scarlet thread that hangs down from Rahab's house when the spies get out, and she's like, oh, he's like, well, that's of course Christ's blood. I was like, you know what, like, it's not wrong. It's just maybe not what the text is trying to point out through that.
Yeah, so it's like Genesis 50 verse 3. 40 days were required for it. That's the length. That's the length of time. It says that's how many are required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. So, yeah.
Because he's also in a pagan land too, so you're not terribly sure what the numbers are doing or why they exist. Which it's like, I think the impulse is right, the instinct is right, but sometimes is maybe a fuller context for this, or is that what?
So
the
Nahum Sarna, who's a Jewish commentator, says on that text, it's not clear if the two periods of the 40 days of embalming and the 70 days of mourning were they consecutive, or do they overlap? He says we're not quite sure, but he says there's like ancient sources that describe a 30-day dressing of the corpse with oils and spices and 72 days of public mourning for a king. And the point he says is that Jacob is apparently being accorded royal honor. So
yeah, that's probably like where you would go with that text a little bit more,
yeah.
is he's being understood as the king with dominion, maybe a little less so 40 days and 40 years with Israel.
Yep.
You got it.
So
yeah. Cool. Well, I just wanted to ask about that one.
No,
but,
I think that's a really good question, because I think a lot of preachers will sometimes run with some of these things when the text may be making a different or a fuller point than that one specific text is trying to point out.
Okay. Yep. Perfect. So next time we talk will be in 400 years when we kick off Exodus.
That's right. You got.
All right, see you then.
Yeah, you got Exodus 1, which has got some fun little connections with the end of Genesis. This is all connected.
Yep.
So, but before
and the Genesis 1.
Yeah, and the Genesis 1.
Genesis 1
all
and
sorts of fun connections.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I wanted to do, so we didn't do this last time. I want to end with where can you find us? And just so people missed it or didn't see it, you can find me at Redeemer Orthodox Presbyterian Church in Santa Maria, California. So if you want some Christ-centered preaching, you can come over there if you don't already live there. Danny, where can they find you?
You can find me at the Oceanside. Sorry, I was thinking about something else. You can find me at Oceanside United Reformed Church. We meet right on the border of Oceanside, Carlsbad, in San Diego. So that's where I'm at. Well, I'm preaching. That's what I was thinking about. Like, well, where am I? I'm right now in my office. But yeah, Oceanside URC. Down here in San Diego. Love to have you. Love to welcome you. If you know anybody in the area, let them know that we exist. We preach the gospel every Sunday. We pray. We celebrate sacraments. Yeah, you can just find me online. So
cool. Nick, where can I find you, or I guess the church that you go to?
Yeah, this will be airing in January. I'll still be in California, still a member at Trinity OPC. It's in South Orange County, Nay Park Church. John Morsh is the pastor there. It's an awesome church. And yeah, that's where I'm a member at.
Former intern at Oceanside URC, I might add.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, if you
There's
guys
a lot of them out there.
If you want, that's what you do.
Yeah, I spread my seed.
I was waiting for that joke.
Oh gosh,
there's the joke.
Is that how we're ending the episode?
So yeah, if you want some Christ-centered preaching, find one of us, these three, and we'll put these links into our show notes, and we'll see you guys next week for the beginning of Exodus.
Yep. See you in 400 years. Peace.
Yep.